All right. I think we're live. I think we're broadcasting. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Bokeh Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and we're here for another day, another episode. A couple of live streams this week. We've got another, actually a brand position consultation coming up on Friday. And if you follow us over at Instagram // I sound like an old guy. Instagram / follow us on Instagram at Bokeh Podcast, Bokeh Podcast, and you can keep up to date with the upcoming live streams there. I'm going to introduce today's guest in just a second, but I do want to remind everybody who's listening to the audio version of this after the fact, we are live streaming. This is actually going out to Facebook and to YouTube, facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast, youtube.com/Bokeh Podcast. And if you want to go back and watch the replay of today's broadcast or previous broadcasts, do that. Take advantage of it. There's a lot of visuals that come along with the video live stream, and you can actually see our faces, our eyes, our expressions. You can ask questions, make comments, send us funny emojis. It can be an interactive experience, so take advantage of that. And like I said, follow us at Bokeh Podcast, and you can keep up to date with the upcoming live stream. One other quick note, as I have continued to promise I would do before every podcast episode, I donated to Charity Water, which is an organization, and I'll pop the receipt up here on the screen, an organization that I give to on a regular basis. I just do this for, and I bring this up during our podcast for the sake of just encouraging you to look for opportunities to give back, whether in your local community or on a national or international level. There's so many different things going on, certainly in our own country, but also internationally as well. There are plenty of opportunities to give, and the cool thing is even just a little bit of money goes a long way. So look for those opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities to give back. All right. Well, I want to go ahead and introduce our guest for today. I'm joined by none other than, you know what, Kalla? I didn't actually ask you. Should I say Kalla or Kalla?
Kalla, you got it.
Kalla,
yeah.
Okay. So I did that right. Kalla Ramberg is with me today. Kalla, thank you for making time for the Bokeh Podcast, for hanging out with us. We're going to get into a pretty interesting topic, geek out a little bit, nerd out a little bit today.
Oh, full nerd. I'm going to ramble like no tomorrow. I already gave Nathan a heads up, but just endless word vomit. So finally putting my rambling to good use, hopefully. So.
Well, absolutely. We're going to be talking, for anybody who maybe hasn't seen the title yet, we're going to talk about how creativity and productivity or efficiency can coexist. Because I think a lot of times there's this kind of weird, maybe unspoken assumption that if you're creative, then naturally you're not going to be an organized, productive person or a structured person. Or if you're a structured, organized person, then naturally you're not going to be as creative. And we're going to discuss how you can actually have kind of best of both worlds and what that might look like on a tangible level. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Kalla, let's first dig into what is usually my first question, which has to do with brand position. And what we're talking about here on a very simple level is just what sets your business apart in your local marketplace. So share with our listeners, if you don't mind, what market you're based in and what your brand position is.
All right, so I am Alberta based. Right now I'm in the mountains of Canmore. I have figured out that I offer wedding photography for couples that take weird as a compliment. So I mean, that's the thing that I strive for, that I personally connect with. So people that are breaking away from tradition, they don't want their photos to reflect that. Like the constant feedback that I get was, oh my God, I was so afraid that you were going to be this like straight-laced, formal person. So
why
I'm like, oh God, no.
Why is that a fear for you? Like what was the, I guess, what's the personal backstory that led to you wanting to create a brand that would kind of step outside the box a little bit?
Yeah, so, when I initially started doing photography, I found that whether it was conscious or unconscious, I was really just emulating what I'd seen done, what was popular, like to the point of even taking on the tone of other people that are like that. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but that's not my tone. And it was, to use a buzzword, inauthentic. And it was just attracting clients that I was not connecting with, and it left me feeling completely drained, which put me on the fast track to burnout. So realizing that the more true I represent myself as, that's what comes to me. Like and again, it's like a cliche to be like, I want to be friends with my clients, but it's so integral to the whole thing for me to connect with them. And I'm someone that gets along with everyone for the most part, but to have that connection on a different level and just connect so well is super, super important. So as I transition into, you know, getting the weird people and the untraditional and the strange, like that's when everything started thriving. Productivity, creativity. I just love weirdos.
Well, you were playing in a space that, and are playing in a space that you're comfortable with, which naturally then just translates to the way that you behave, the way that you interact with your clients. That helps set the tone, I think. So you feel more comfortable. Like you said, you're less likely to burn out because now you're playing in a space you're comfortable with. You're not trying to force something that doesn't come as naturally. And you're able to create a brand that is a relatively accurate reflection of your personality, which is fun. But you're ultimately, as a result, able to provide a much better service. And that's really huge.
Yeah.
You also said something that's really important, and I want everybody listening in to really key into this, and that is you initially just kind of leaned toward what everybody else was doing, right? And maybe you can comment briefly on this. What was it just because it was easy to kind of copy what other people were doing? Or why do you think the tendency was there to copy what others were doing?
I think a lot of it was fueled by my fear of failure. Like to finally start chasing photography was this terrifying high stakes thing, and I was like, I need to succeed. There's no other option. So for me, I just immediately saw these people that I put up on such a high pedestal of having accomplished careers and full bookings, and I was like, oh, that's the way, that's the path that I need to go on. But that was not right for me at all. And I just felt icky afterwards, you know, like I was representing myself as like cutesy and I'm a family photographer and dainty and gentle, but that is not me. And the more me I am, the better people I get, like match wise. I'm not saying dainty people are bad, but I find it helps so much with the comfort level of my clients, and comfort leads into having fun, enjoying yourself, and getting great photos. So I mean, it's letting the client be comfortable more than anything. So.
Well, and I think, again, you highlight something that's really interesting in this conversation. In fact, I could probably spend a whole podcast episode or 3 just digging into this with you, because I think it's so important for our industry. I see this tendency for people to put so much weight on, quote unquote, like you said earlier, that buzzword, being authentic, being quote unquote who they are. And these concepts all carry some significance to a point, I think, which really is relevant in conversation as business owners, just as human beings. But we've placed so much weight on that we've gone to the extreme where people are like, this is quote unquote who I am, and they're not willing to keep an open mind to areas that they may need to improve in. So we don't need to go to that extreme, but recognizing where you're comfortable and playing in that space, knowing that it actually enables you to be a better business owner, I think it's really important. I've shared this or some version of this on the podcast in the past, but one of the things that happened to me a number of years ago is I realized when I would go to these large photography gatherings, I'd go to WPPI, a big conference, and they had big parties, and I'd walk into these rooms, and I had internally this idea of a person that I was supposed to be performative, basically, when I went into these rooms with large groups of people. And it ultimately became exhausting to me. Why was it exhausting? Well, because I was trying to be, and again, I hesitate to use the phrase because it is so cliche right now, but I was trying to be something or someone that I wasn't. There was no need for me to go in and perform. Where I actually functioned really well was in one-on-one conversation, not being the center of a large crowd and performing for everybody and being the entertainer, but where I tend to thrive, still do, is in one-on-one conversation with people. And so if instead of trying to be this thing, trying to create this persona for the sake of being cool, the moment that I realized I was exhausting myself because I was trying to be this other person, and I set that aside and I started focusing what I knew I was good at, and by the way, happened to be also be more comfortable at, oh my word, it literally just took the pressure off. And I no longer ended up in the space where I had to leave the party every 15, 20 minutes because I was just kind of exhausted from the process. Does that resonate with you a little bit?
On the deepest level, it rings so true of when you're in a situation like that, and performative is a good way to put it. You're putting in all this extra effort to build up this facade of what you want others to see. And it's exhausting. I mean, you start like for me, when I would do something like that, I would go take like a bathroom break when I didn't need the bathroom, just to be removed from that situation. Let that fall for just a second.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting and it's not fulfilling. And I'm sure we'll get more into it later, but doing things like that murders your creativity. So
right. Well, I have to give you props, and I'm going to actually share your website here for everybody who might be watching. And for those of you that are not streaming online, make sure you go check out Kalla's website. If you go to Kalla, KallaRamberg, photography.ca. And of course, we'll link to this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But you can see top of the website, top of the homepage, big text. You can't miss it when you land there. Above the fold, without having to scroll, wedding photography for couples who take weird as a compliment. And
your face.
It is truly in your face. And there's no missing it. They don't need to go searching for it. It's not going to take any time to realize who this person is. And certainly I've not gone to a bunch of other photographers' websites that are saying this kind of thing. So immediately you stand out. You've created distinction. They have a premise set for that potential relationship with you. And they can decide at that point, even, does this fit for me? Doesn't really vibe with me, and move on. Or they can say, oh my word, I like this girl already. Let me work with her. And then they continue that potential conversation and ultimately book you.
Exactly. It's like right off the bat, there's this initial filter of like, if you're looking for something that's not me, I think right off the bat, you get the impression, she's strange, let's go the other way, which is great. It's filtering out the people that are where I'm not the photographer for them. And the majority of the people that or clients I've been getting lately say, I connected with your website or connected with you or whatever it is. Like, that's feedback that I get from the majority of people is I really enjoy who you are and what you represent. Which is fantastic. Also, I'm sweating bullets because it was on my never-ending to-do list of things to like revise the site before you like scrutinize it. I'm like, oh god, there's only so many things I can do.
Oh no, we're not judging here. Again, the compliments on having that brand position front and center, and it's a good example for everybody. I know that we kind of parked at this question here for a little bit, but for everybody listening in, do go to Kalla's website, and we'll link to it in the show notes, KallaRambergPhotography.ca. And we'll also, of course, link to her Instagram. It's Kalla Ramberg Photography. And we'll link to that in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. And you know what? Here I was actually demonstrating your site, Kalla, and Instagram. And then I wasn't actually on your Instagram and website. So we're doing that now. For everybody who is looking at the live stream, I pushed the right button this time. All right, there we go. Now we'll bring it back to the conversation here. And what I want to do at this point is just kind of jump to next question. These are technically supposed to be rapid fire questions. We always end up spending like half the podcast on them. But next question for you has to do with client experience. This is something I normally ask all of our guests, because at the center of a successful business is one, at least in most cases, that is paying attention to client experience. What is a big idea driving the client experience for you in your business?
I mean, right off the bat, listening to them and what they need is so important. The more that you can understand them and where they're coming from, what their personal love story is, I mean, the better. Everyone's is going to be different. You can't go into that interaction with this kind of preconceived, like, you can't have a template in your head of exactly what they need. Listening to them and finding out what is important to them. I mean, even down to the small details of what their weird little quirks are. Like, finding those things out has been huge in being able to cater and personalize their experience and what I do to be the best fit. 100%. Like, you can go into a wedding day with the idea of, okay, I can get perfectly composed shots and this and that and perfect timeline, but the biggest takeaway for them is usually the emotion of that day and the sentimental things and their personal experience, which you need the photos to reflect. And since it's different for everyone, you need to find out what their weirdness is, what their quirks are. Super huge, which I adore doing.
Well, it's important to note. I mean, you highlight this fact that we can't, as many weddings as you've probably photographed. I photographed hundreds myself over 10 years. And I mean, just as human beings in general, like, it's easy. We're kind of wired to recognize patterns, right? And we immediately make assumptions internally, even if they're subconscious. We're making assumptions about the person in front of us or the people in front of us based on our experience. and based on the things that we've learned over our lives. And in many cases, those assumptions are accurate, but in some cases, especially in the context of business, that can come back to bite us. And so the last thing that we need to do as we go into an interaction with a new client is to assume that we're just going to know everything that they would want. And it may seem obvious to some that are listening in, but to ask questions and actually listen, not ask questions and then go check out and go somewhere else mentally, but actually be there and listen to what they say, what's important to them, so that we can capture those things on the wedding day. Super important.
Yeah, like you could go into a wedding day and technically, or from a photography standpoint, photograph it perfectly where you're getting all the shots and all of these things. But I think that can quickly turn into almost this like muscle memory of, okay, these are the shots that I want, but you might not be picking up on the subtle nuances of their day and what things are important to them that you wouldn't know otherwise.
Sure. Important to ask those questions.
Yeah.
What would you say is an example? Because of course, this is a relatively commonplace concept. You hear a lot of photographers talking about asking questions, getting to know the client, but it is an important principle that doesn't hurt to reiterate. That being said, different photographers, I think, go about it in a different way. Just give an example, one of the questions that you might ask that kind of brings nuance to your understanding of what it is that they're looking for.
So on a grand scale, you're finding out what kind of people they are. And for me, I like to pick apart and find the little subtle sentimental things for them. By asking those questions and by getting to know them, and most importantly, having them be comfortable enough to disclose that to you has been huge. And people all have like their little funny quirks and things. So for one small example, I shot a wedding last weekend and I love them. They're fantastic and hilarious. And in talking to them beforehand during one of the consultation Zoom calls or whatever, I found out that they have a small collection of stuffed animals that are so incredibly sentimental to them. It's their family. So we had them bring them to the wedding day. So their kids were there. They're like these little stuffed cows. There are a couple of them, the Trudies. Incorporating them into the shots. So they have like a family photo with these things, and like that means a lot to them. They love the photos and their experience, which makes my heart so happy. There's some good candid photos of them having a Trudy cow fight where they're throwing them at each other in the night, and those photos to me are hilarious and wouldn't have happened if I just went in with the idea of I'm going to work through my photography template or shot list and just get these traditional things. That
is not something that you would have guessed you would be photographing.
No, but I love it. The stranger the situation that I'm in, the happier I am, the more creative I am. Like, I want to coax out the weird in people if that's what is in them. So just extracting that weirdness is massive.
Totally makes sense. Well, again, the importance of asking questions and certainly not assuming. Great reminder. I want to jump to the next question, though, and this has to do with time management, which is honestly largely what we're going to be talking about today. But we'll save the kind of deeper part of that conversation for a few minutes from now. For the time being, let's just say somebody has 5 minutes, they just chimed in, and they're going to have to go in 5 minutes, but you want to give them the biggest takeaway for time management, productivity, while also having a life. What would that big idea be?
You might be misled in asking me that because my work-life balance is abysmal, but I'm working on it.
Okay.
Oh God. So being intentional with how you're getting your fulfillment. For me, I'm so fulfilled by doing anything photography related that I could work 50 hours in a day and be fulfilled. But there's different ways and different kinds of fulfillment that you need to get that aren't work related, even if work is your passion and fulfills you. So making sure that you make time and mental space for doing things that fulfill you in another way, and then figuring out exactly how you can do that.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm working on, I'm trying to practice what I preach. For me, that looks like fully removing myself from the option of working, going into no service, disappearing into the forest. Like that brings me so much fulfillment in a different way than work in photography does. So I have to set time aside for that and make sure that I do that. So
Well, you may
that.
work-life balance may not be your thing, but I have to say that the way that you just described the significance of understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to achieve fulfillment, we literally have not had any other photographers say that, certainly in the context of this question. So, and I think it's extremely poignant, and there's an interesting conversation around work, and certainly I've experienced this in my personal life, so I can speak from personal experience being around other people who it's as though all they really know is work, and outside of that environment, it's almost a foreign world to them. They're kind of lost. They don't know what to do, and that's kind of the extreme end of the graph, if you will. But you have to ask a question, I think, as an individual, if you find yourself doing that, or just looking at observing other people. What are they overcompensating for? Why do they feel like they need to be busy all the time? Are they running away from something? Are they hiding from something? That at least just from the outside looking in, that is a question certainly that I would ask. And I think that we should ask ourselves too, if we have a tendency of working nonstop and somehow at the end of the day, we don't have time for relationships or even just to sit and breathe, or we can't stand or can't handle being in the quiet on our own. Why is that? And why is that the existence of our life? Like why are we bored otherwise?
Yeah, that is such a good point too. Like that's something that I've been aware of with myself. Like I, for a period, was the person that for a long period that used work as an escapism and as a coping mechanism, because the remainder of like my life outside of work was squalor that I did not want to deal with. So, I mean, under the guise of I'm being productive and I'm hustling and I'm keeping my head down and working, I justified being that person that worked all the time. And it's something that when you do it, you get praise. Like, oh my God, she works so hard. That's incredible. But for me, it's easy to slip into using that as ignoring everything else.
Yeah, and of course, we can't be quick to judge anybody because we don't know what's going on underneath. But that's kind of a question that comes to mind. What is being run away from, or ignored, or compensated for by this obsession with work? And at the end of the day, I know again from personal experience that certainly personal relationships, whether it's with friends or family, suffer when we don't prioritize them, when work becomes the priority consistently. We certainly have put ourselves in a position where physically, mentally, psychologically, we can burn ourselves out if that's literally all that we do. And so I think just looking for, I know that so-called balance is going to look different for everyone, but being really clear about where our motivations lie for how and why we spend our time the way that we do. That's a super healthy question. And we'll leave it at that because we could spend a lot of time here. I'm just glad that you brought it up. I think it's a really healthy question to ask, and it's a healthy effort on your part, certainly, to try to be intentional and doing what you do, understanding what is motivating you. I think that's really, really incredible. I'm glad that you highlight that. I've got one other question for you before we dig into our main topic at hand, and that has to do with a favorite book. And this is, this could be a personal book, this could be a business book, maybe a combination of both. Is there a book that comes to mind that's made a big impact in your life?
There is one that jumps to mind, and admittedly and unfortunately I haven't made the time to do as much reading. Like for me, it comes in spurts. Like I can be an avid reader and hyperfixate on reading and burn through a book in a couple of days and then not touch one again for months. So for me, it's kind of a couple different things. Like the first book that I read and connected with after a few years of not being able to sit and focus and read and make time for it was The Power of Now by, I'm going to butcher his last name, by Eckhart Tolle.
Eckhart Tolle, yeah.
Thank you, yes. For me, that was the first, it came at such an important time where I was trying to learn mindfulness and self-reflection. So in that period of time, I connected with it so deeply. So that in conjunction with journaling, like for me, when I love reading books like that, and then at the same time journaling and finding a way for that to relate to me and how I can use that to help myself. So it just looks like squalor when I'm reading. There's like highlighters everywhere, and like there's pens and journals, and I'm just like frantically reading. But that was the first time where I realized that you can slow down and focus on where you're at instead of living so far in the future that you're not experiencing now, and not dwelling on the past to the point where you aren't living. You're either living in the past or in the future, and never in the moment you're at, which is all that you ever have, as cheesy as it is. There's going to be a lot of cheese today. It's going to be so much cheese.
This is important. And by the way, I pulled this up for anybody who's just listening to the audio. I pulled the book up on Amazon, The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment by Eckhart Tolle. And we'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. Little side note, actually, we haven't talked about it in a little while. If you go to bokehbookshelf.com, for everybody that's listening in or watching, we actually have a list of the most popular books here on the Bokeh Podcast, and you can check that out at bokehbookshelf.com. But that being said, just to kind of come back to the conversation, Kalla, when I take time to meditate, one of the things that happens when I'm naturally in the meditative process, at least for me anyway, I'm sitting down in a quiet room, back up against the wall. And when I close my eyes, my meditative process usually intentionally is to see thoughts in and then out, and repeat that over and over again to a point where you kind of, you become centered internally. And it's an incredible experience. I learned it through a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. But sometimes there's significant value for me, especially if I'm going 100 miles an hour and have done so over a number of days, and I'm just kind of burnt out, to sit in the quiet, to close my eyes and just kind of be there, not try to do anything. My brain's like, oh my word, I finally have the space to process what in the world's been going on for the last 2 weeks. And it starts to do that, and it starts to organize and filter and kind of process through some thoughts. And it's just a good reminder for me that, to your point, taking time every once in a while to just be here right now and stop trying to run a race and get to the next thing all the time. It's massively beneficial, certainly for our personal lives, our mental health, and ultimately for our business as well.
Yeah, no, that's a huge point. And it really is the best feeling when you are able to tap into that inner calmness. Like this is another thing where like I'll go through phases of it with meditation and just slowing down. Like for me, sitting down and trying to do that, there is just this my brain is a piñata that's exploding all the time, and there's so much happening in there, and there's a train wreck in the background. There's just a lot happening, and getting that to quiet down and just slowing down is an incredible feeling when it happens, which is not nearly enough for me because I don't make time for it, which I should and I will. But
we're going to hold you to that. You just committed to it here live. I mean, the millions of people listening in and watching, they're going to all hold you to it. You're going to get gobs of DMs. Watch out.
That's a good way to measure DMs, a gob. That's a good unit of measurement.
You like that?
I was hoping for a bushel of DMs or a trough full. Something.
Well, we're going to link to this book in the show notes for everybody listening in, just as a reminder, as you said, to take time to just be. And it does sound cliche, but that's the funny thing about cliches. A lot of times that there's significant truth to them, and a lot of us just talk about the cliches. We never actually live them. And when we actually take the time to live them and apply them, implement them, it's amazing the difference they can make. So thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, of course. One quick thing, cliches are usually a thing for a reason. And just from the most basic simplified perspective on the outside, it's like, oh, that's cheesy. I hear that all the time. That's stupid. But generally there is a way to dig deeper into that and find the real applicable meaning on they're usually true. They really are. Yeah.
I actually forgot to ask you one question. I'm going to jump to this and we'll get into our main topic for today, delegation and outsourcing. And it usually falls hand in hand with the conversation about time management. This is an important topic here on the podcast for multiple reasons. I mean, this podcast is largely about building a sustainable business, which means working intelligently and having a life, having some kind of work-life balance. Delegation plays an important role in that. And so I'm curious if this is something you've experimented with, whether you're delegating emails or editing or album design or accounting or anything in your business. What's that been like for you?
So that is a whole new world to me, and a very and I'm very excited for it because it's something that I have to do. And you're gonna love this, and I swear Nathan is not holding a gun to my head to say this, but I outsourced my first gallery ever to Photographers Edit, and it turned out, turned out so beautifully, and I'm so happy. But in all honesty, it's something that I put off for so long because I was so genuinely terrified of the idea of not having my hands on the product from start to finish. And like editing for me is such an integral part of the product that I make, to the point like when I'm shooting, I have an idea of like what I want to do with editing. So to like I see my photos as an extension of my soul. So to take a little chunk of that soul and hand it to someone else on the internet and say, hey, can you edit this little piece of my soul, is terrifying. So that will already be a massive help to have that off my plate.
Well, and as you're talking here, Brittany Carey chimed in from Facebook. She said, I need to outsource. And then she said, so hard to give up that control. And it's true. And,
yes.
And this is actually, and by the way, Brittany, thank you for commenting. And anybody who's listening and watching, please feel free to do it. Comment, ask questions as we go along. Love the interaction. But I'd love for you to comment on that then, Kalla, if you will. When taking that leap, especially for somebody like yourself who is very, like internally is very much the artist type and holds the image processing very close, what would you say was the thing that enabled the idea, the concept that enables you to take that step to outsource your editing? And by the way, to your point earlier, we didn't plan on having this conversation, so this certainly wasn't meant to be a commercial for Photographers Edit, but what was that? What was the thing that pushed you over the edge? In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. I mean, pushing me over the edge is a good way to phrase it, because I think initially it was out of necessity in terms of the workload that I have and the amount of time that exists in a day period. It was not feasible to do that. But the final hurdle that I had to get over was realizing that, okay, I have too much of this like ego attachment to my photos and thinking that there's no way someone else can do what I want. So, and I'm not a controlling person with anything aside from photography. It's everything else. I'm like, I don't care at all. Literally anything could happen to me and I would roll with it. So getting over that was a huge thing, and finding a way that I could do it comfortably. So for me, I've kind of decided that like every gallery, I'll edit at least some of them. So like the highlight preview gallery that I send after the wedding, within the 2 or 3 days after, like I will always hand edit that. Those will be the most important key images. Like I want my hands on that. I want to have that be exactly as I envisioned and as I want. And from there, once it's passed off to the editing team, I think they can see that and see what I want the rest to look like.
Yeah.
So like the idea of being completely removed from it still scares me a little bit, especially because my editing style does vary so much, and that's something I've intentionally done. I never want to stick to one look or preset or one trend, which is a whole nother thing I can tangent on for 17 consecutive years. I want the photos to be timeless and not just trendy. I want people to look back and it'll still be a good photo. And I want it to be personalized to the client. I want it to reflect exactly what their day was and just them as a couple. And that's going to be a little bit different from everyone. I can ramble about that whole thing.
And you got some encouragement from listeners too. Patrick said, thank you, Kalla, for being so brave and vulnerable with our photography community. Thank you, Nathan, for a great podcast.
Hell yeah, thank you. Patrick, Aaron, 2 first names. Good for you.
It's awesome.
It's a lot of first names.
And then Brittany says, yes, the fluidity of style. That's what scares me with the outsourcing. Will it still represent my style? And you actually make an interesting point in that conversation, though, Kalla, which is that you processed a select number of images first, and our team is then able to use that as a point of reference when they process the rest. And that's something that a lot of our clients do. They'll process, whether it's for a blog or social media or otherwise, a sneak peek, they'll process a few, and then they'll just flag those images when they send us their Lightroom catalog, and our team can match that editing style very effectively, actually. So I'm glad that you highlight that.
Yeah, like as one last little side note. Again, please just mute my microphone if you want me to shut up. I'm not a subtle person. just mute the microphone.
We actually don't talk a lot about Photographers Edit here, so we'll let you be a commercial for PE today.
Yeah, I'll just be a shining neon billboard for Photographers Edit right now. Not
literally,
paid.
I think you actually do. You have a light shining from underneath, like from underneath?
There's like a little bit of a light over there because I'm right next to the window, and like as the sun comes around, I slowly just get baked by the sun.
Oh, so it's actually coming in the window and reflecting off.
Oh yeah. I guess the sun's coming out now. Yeah. So
yeah, you're getting highlighted there. Yeah. You got a glow or something.
Or I'm just like nervous sweating and it looks like a glow.
No, you're totally fine. Please continue with what you were going to say, and then we'll jump to our main topic.
Yeah, to jump back in, like for me, edit style varies so much and it impacts the photo so much. So I mean, even for one full wedding day, I like to have a cohesive look, but it's going to vary so much. I mean, 11 a.m. ceremony in the bright sun is going to look different than the 10 p.m. dancing at night, or when you're getting ready inside a building. Like it's a different light, it's a different mood, it's a different moment. I want how the photo looks to represent that, and I don't think that you can force it into one little box of a preset that you decided beforehand. I try not to be all over the place with how everything looks. Like I want the cohesion, but it varies a lot. Like there's so many things that happen during a wedding day in different settings. So
yeah, well, I mean, one of the things, and our team is super talented, so the fact that they're able to go through and match your image editing style through a day, if you're giving them examples from, let's say, the first part of the day during the preparation, and maybe another set of examples for the ceremony, another for the portraits, another for the reception, then our team can use those as a point of reference, even if the editing style is kind of shifting throughout the day. But the key is being super clear with our team up front with examples and then in instructions, what it is that you're looking for. And as long as you're clear about that, and I say not you, Kalla, specifically, but for everybody listening in, as long as you, the photographer, are super clear about what it is that you're looking for, our team can match that editing style, and they're super great at it. So I appreciate the shout out, the plug there, Kalla, and Brittany and Patrick as well for your comments. And Brittany, we're here. We got you. She says, as I'm hunched over editing right now, this is fabulous. So.
I look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame because I'm a slave to Lightroom. So Brittany, look at me. What you're going to do, you're going to straighten your back right now, and you're going to have good posture. Just stop.
As you outsource your image editing to Photographers Edit. Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, I want to keep going here in this conversation because we got about 20 minutes or so here. Let's dig into kind of our main focus today, which is how creativity and productivity can coexist. And it sounds, even the title itself sounds a little bit nerdy, I have to admit. But again, I think there's this kind of weird assumption, maybe unspoken in some cases, that those two concepts can't coexist. It's kind of one or the other. You know, you talk to the average creative and it's like, you have the like super messy desk and office and workspace, but then they just produce these beautiful images. And then you see this super like organized, structured, neat working space person, and they're awesome with the business side of things, but their images are like, they're fine, they're good enough. And that's kind of the assumption, the stereotype, right? But what really started our conversation today, I posted a quote a little while back, and this is actually from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist, I believe. Joe Rogan had him on the podcast, but he said, if you want to become more creative, become less productive. If you want creativity to become a fundamental part of your life, then you're going to have to not get stuff done at some point. And you responded to that quote that I posted on my stories, Kalla. Share
just big old ramble.
Well, share your gut response to that, and that'll kind of set us up for the conversation at hand.
Yeah. So my gut response is a lot of the time when people talk about having creativity and productivity coexist, they kind of talk about it as like, oh, like can they? Should they? Like, aren't they separate? For me, I think it's not only can they go together, but they should. And I think there's huge benefits that you can reap from infusing them together, because I really think it's this feedback loop of they fuel each other when balanced properly. And if you're only focusing on one, the other will suffer. But if you can find a way to combine them and have them benefit each other, I think it's a massive thing.
It's a massive win, really, right? Why do you think, though, I mean, there's a tendency in our culture, we know this, we see this almost on a daily basis, whether it's in politics or otherwise, for people to go to one extreme or the other, right? So why do you think there's this assumption almost, and again, it's in some ways, I guess, kind of unspoken, but that it's either one or the other? Where does that extreme thought process come from?
I think there's just, in general, such a separate view of productivity and creativity. Like, even the word productivity kind of has this connotation of putting your head down and grinding, and the hustle culture thing, which just makes me die inside because it sucks so much ass. Like, toxic productivity is a thing. And again, like, a lot of people separate that and think I need to put my head down and work, and maybe I'll sprinkle in a little bit of creativity with something else. But if you're focusing way too much on being productive and working and grinding, you're going to neglect the creativity. And when you don't have creativity, your productivity will suffer. You can be creatively productive. For me, I know that I need to avoid feeling stagnant in my work, like it's an absolute plague. If I'm bored or falling into routine with my photography, it will suffer. So I personally focus as much as I can on tapping into that creativity and bringing it into how I'm being productive.
Sure. Well, you actually, in fact, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read what you said to me on Instagram, because it really sums this up, your position on it, pretty brilliantly. And you said, I think that they work in tandem. You said, for me personally, I need to have some semblance of productivity schedule to keep me on track. A brain emotion tends to stay in motion. Productivity and accomplishing things gives me this feeling of flow or momentum in my life that translates into the creative part of me as well. It seems like a fine line where I need to practice both and not neglect the other. I've gone through periods of sheer nonstop productivity, which inevitably leads not only to burnout in every way possible, mental, emotional, spiritual, professional, but also depletes my creativity. I think that when you're so consumed with productivity and accomplishing tangible goals, it takes up the mental space that could otherwise be left open. An open and unstressed mind, and I love this, is the perfect environment to foster a healthy imagination, which I believe is the root of creativity. And you see this with people who are so obsessed with work that they don't really exist in any other space, and that imagination is non-existent, largely non-existent. You try to have a conversation with them about anything else, and it can just fall flat, right? Because their brain doesn't function any other way. All they're thinking about is work all the time. They don't give the space for imagination and then ultimately creativity. So I think you make an interesting point there. But then just finishing up what you said you just don't have the full mental space for creativity if you're fully consumed with productivity. You can give the mind things to do by being productive, or you can give it space and let it come up with things for you to do. So overall, I think that they can and should coexist, but it's dependent on the person what balance of productivity and doing nothing, allowing creativity should be. You talked about how productivity and accomplishing things gives you a feeling of flow that then translates into the creative. Can you explain what that looks like tangibly, just practically, like in a day-to-day basis for you?
So how being productive and creative can get me into that flow state, right? Just to summarize, my brain does cartwheels when I try to think about things sometimes.
It was a long quote to read through, but that was, you were just saying productivity and accomplishing things gives me this feeling of, quote, flow or momentum in my life that translates into the creative part of me as well. So I'm just curious if you could kind of explain what that looks like on a day-to-day basis in your work.
The big thing for me is making sure that the ways in which I'm being productive aren't draining me. So very specifically, I recognize that the types of things I was doing under the guise of productivity that was leaving me burnt out. For a small example, like, I realized I don't love doing family sessions, and like, that's not my specialty. It doesn't resonate with me, to the point where I would be just not dreading, it's a harsh word, but just genuinely not looking forward to the majority of family
Sure.
sessions. So
That's
I would
fine.
have
We
this,
all
like,
have our
anxiety.
preferences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I stopped offering that, and like I do sometimes still, but it's something that I don't push for. I completely took it off my plate, erased it from my website. I don't represent myself as being that, because that afterwards I would just feel drained. It felt like work.
Right. Yeah.
and
Brittany
I-
says family sessions are my biggest struggle. And it sounds like you can relate, Kalla. You know, it's interesting what happens with stress or struggle is it does, I think it's that kind of fight or flight response that our bodies, as humans, we tend to respond in stressful situations in that way where our mind just goes into this hyper-focus mode and trying to kind of survive and make it through. And it doesn't give space for creativity. It doesn't give space to just sit and be and to come up with ideas and ultimately create, especially as a photographer. So I'm not surprised that was the state you ended up in. So you're saying, you know what, I don't have to be productive all the time. I don't have to shoot everything. I'm going to focus on the things that encourage, well, first of all, that make me excited, that make me happy, which then naturally encourages creativity. Do I understand that right?
Yes, 100% nail on the head. Initially, I would blindly say yes to any job or anything at all. And I found that it was crushing me and burning me out, and which for me burns out my creativity, and then my motivation flies out the window a million miles away, never to return. Well, it did return. It's a boomerang, I guess. But and it's such a murky thing when you take something that's inherently creative or an art or your passion. So for me, photography, and then to make that into your job and into your income. And it can be difficult. It can be really easy to slip into doing it out of obligation, which removes the fun, which can remove the creativity. And I think once you're like sucking that creativity out of photography, it's like I fast tracked myself to burn out incredibly quickly, because I was doing those things that just squeezed the passion out of me and just burnt out. Didn't have room for creativity, didn't have the mental space or the drive to do it. Yeah. It was just, okay, I'm going to go there and click a button and put on that act, and it was exhausting, and sure, it was being productive, but it wasn't being productive in a way that fulfilled me and that utilized my creativity.
Well, it's interesting we could go real deep with this one and spend a lot of time here as well, but you think about the number of people in our culture, we'll just take American culture, for example, that are constantly looking for escapes from their life. They need an escape. They need, whether it's TV or their phone or otherwise, they need to not be here and present. Like we were talking about earlier with that book, The Power of Now. They're not comfortable just being here right now, because frankly, whether they're realizing it, whether they're conscious of it or not, they're just not happy with their existence. They constantly need an escape. And you know, unfortunately, I guess not everybody's lucky enough to have to run their own business where they get to control and decide on everything. And certainly there's some wonderful advantages to that. But at the end of the day, if we are in a state of frustration and boredom, then the last thing that we're going to be in that case is, well, certainly happy, and as a result, creative. And so I'm wondering, maybe just on a practical level here, as we're finishing up our conversation, can you share a few ways with our listeners, especially based on your personal experience, that our listeners, photography business owners, can ultimately have both that productivity and efficiency, also be creative as well? Because I mean, from personal experience, I know that productivity, efficiency, and creativity can coexist. And in fact, one enables another. For me, it creates, if I have structure in place, it ultimately enables me the life, the flexible life that then gives me the space to be creative. I do have time to sit and to think and to come up with ideas and to plan. My version of creativity is not with a camera right now. It's coming up with ideas and planning for my various brands and working on ideas that will enable my team to be able to carry out, our mission collectively. That's how I create. That's what creativity looks like for me. But I don't have that freedom in that space unless I'm intentional with the structure that enables the productivity and efficiency. What does that look like for you as a photographer, and what do you recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I love that you kind of finished that sentiment with the word intention, because that was the first and biggest point in my head in regards to that.
Yeah.
So being completely intentional with what you're doing, and more importantly, the motivation behind it, and having the self-awareness to step back and look at, okay, why am I doing these things? Does this fulfill me? And trying to evaluate, is something that I'm doing a creativity killer, or is it something that's going to boost it up and help me? So for me, it was stepping back and realizing, okay, I don't want to just blindly take any job because money, and like going into those things, I would know this doesn't fulfill me. It doesn't give me that drive. So, and I guess the next kind of point is trying to not only balance productivity and creativity, but infusing them. So putting creativity into my work and making sure that I'm running away from stagnation as quickly as I can, and running towards the things that give me that spark and give me that drive. And for me, if I'm at a session or doing a shoot and there's something fun or new or unusual or exciting, like I would absolutely call that a flow state. You get into this mode where you're thinking creatively, and with that, I'm way more productive. If I was shooting the exact same thing, like back to back to back to back, I would shrivel up and die inside, 100%. Like, always looking for new ways to put creativity into your work, to keep it fresh, to keep you evolving. I never want to get bored with what I'm doing, and I can keep rambling forever and ever.
Well, would you say,
but,
I mean, as a principle, you talked first about the importance of being intentional, both in what you're doing and why you're doing it, and I think that's important. Again, that's something we could spend a lot of time on, but that's a massive, massive principle that we really could just stop on. Like that in and of itself, understanding on a bigger picture level what is motivating us as an individual, and as a result, then our choices as a business owner and as a photographer, and then how we're spending our time. This is such an important conversation. It's one that comes up quite a bit here on the podcast. But then adding, I mean, would you sum up the point that you were just making with the word variety, or is that too simplistic? I mean, infusing variety in your day-to-day workflow for the sake of minimizing boredom and encouraging creativity?
I use the word variety for it, for sure. I mean, variety is the spice of life, and you got to keep your life spicy or it gets boring. So variety and new things and always evolving are just so pivotal to it. Like in a practical way, for me, that looks like coming up with fun new ideas to try, and like a huge thing, which I guess would be kind of a third point. It gets murky because I ramble and everything becomes one big point. I'm just a run-on sentence of a person with no punctuation. Like maybe like 50 commas, but a practical way of doing that is making time to do, especially like unpaid shoots. Like, you have a fun idea, make it happen, collaborate with other people. That is a huge thing. I get so much fulfillment and so much drive, and it just sparks the creativity if I'm doing like a fun collaboration or getting involved with other people and coming together to create something new and something exciting that you wouldn't be able to do by yourself otherwise. Even if that looks like just forcing your friend to be a model. I've stuck a lot of my friends in wedding dresses and had some fake weddings before, because I'm like, I have this idea that I want to try. I'm going to stick you in this dress that I got at Value Village for $26. It's a little dated, but it'll do. Yeah. And just running around and doing something that will bring that creativity back, that will get that spark back. You cannot let that spark die. If you got into photography because you love photography like most people do, you can't let it just slip into becoming work. I'm a firm believer that you can do what you love for work, but it is a tricky thing to balance. But to bring that intentionality into it can help you to achieve it. I really think that you do. I can't imagine living a life where I'm doing a job that I hate.
Well,
not anymore.
To go back to your first point, though, I think starting with that so-called intentionality, being clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve, will then enable you to be intentional about how you're spending your time day to day. I think a lot of times for photographers, it's the photographers that are just functioning haphazardly on a day-to-day basis, just kind of reacting to whatever's happening in front of them. Those are the photographers who end up losing the creative side because they're so caught up in just busy work and the busy work of reacting to whatever's in front of them, rather than, to your point, Kalla, being intentional about what it is that they're trying to accomplish and be clear about that, taking the time to actually write it out or put it in Evernote or whatever they need to do, but being clear about that idea or those ideas, and then figuring out what the next steps are to accomplish those ideas. That will enable them to be very intentional and ultimately structured in their day-to-day activities. But the cool thing about that then is it will then make space and time for the creative side, because now they're not just constantly carried away with reacting to whatever's going on in front of them and just hoping to kind of make it through. They get the stuff done that they didn't know that they need to in order to achieve these goals. And then you get to the second and third points that you make. One, which is to implement variety in your day-to-day workflow. And then third, to try new things as well, which, oh my goodness, having new experiences as an individual, as a photography business owner, you're right. It does add spice to life. It makes it interesting. And you never know then
what's spicy.
Yeah. Well, you never know what ideas that will then ultimately generate for the business owner and for the individual for that matter. So these are good reminders for all of us. And I appreciate you kind of sharing your perspective on them.
Yeah, of course. And just as like a side note to kind of tag on to what you said, if you're like, it's great to have that ability to do an unpaid, fun, creative session, especially if it's something that you want to get more of. And even when in the back of my head, know I have so much to do and sessions coming up and an obscene amount of stuff to edit, I know that if I set that aside for a minute and do something fun, something creative, that ultimately my ability to be productive with all of those other things will benefit. Like I benefit more from making time to do a creative session once in a while than I would just sitting down and burning through edits and doing website and doing marketing. Like you need to be intentional with doing those fulfilling things for sure. Yeah,
that's very, very true. I mean, this is a good reminder for all of us, myself included, and I'm certainly going to continue to strive to be more intentional. Brittany says, yes, the creative shoots allow me to come back to the daunting projects I get creatively blocked on.
Yes.
And yeah, it really does. It sparks that creativity and it sparks ultimately, I guess, inspiration, new ideas. And that's huge. That's a really big deal. And finding, again, being intentional up front for the sake of creating a workflow that enables us to accomplish the kind of the day-to-day tasks, the things that need to get done, creating an efficient workflow and systems, putting those in place, then giving us the freedom to have the space to do these things that will encourage and enable creativity. Super important. And again, I appreciate you making time to kind of share with all of us today. I have to actually jump back here too, because Tanya Lynn said, I love outsourcing for color correction. I drive myself crazy obsessing over skin tones. Photographer's edit is amazing. I had a few quick personal touches to the images when I get them back. Easy peasy. So efficient. You guys rock. Thanks for the shout out, Tanya. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all the engagement today too. I mean, all this conversation, questions, comments, everything.
Brittany, Tanya, let's be friends. Brittany coming in hot with the conversation. Get her on the podcast.
Absolutely. We should. But Kalla, I really appreciate you doing this today. Remind our listeners just one more time, if you will, your website and Instagram, where they can follow you online.
All right. So on Instagram, my name is Kalla Ramberg Photography. So that is KallaRamberg Photography. Website, exact same, .ca. It's Canadian, represent. Those are my two main things. I will say my Instagram stories are where I shine.
Okay.
I hate making reels. Instagram stories, that's where they're at.
Perfect.
You want to see me being an idiot all the time.
Well, thank you for making time for sharing with all of us. Thanks for everybody who jumped in the comments and added to the conversation as well. We'll put all the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. Thank you, everybody, and have an absolutely wonderful day.
Thank you for having me, Nathan. I can't believe someone wanted me to ramble.
It's our privilege.
Oh my God.
Thanks for